The night I had a heart attack, my daughter ignored 3 calls from me. I know that sounds painful. What hurt even more was what she was doing instead. At 8:52 p.m., while I was lying alone on my kitchen floor waiting for an ambulance, she posted smiling vacation photos from a beach resort in Florida. 3 weeks later, those same photos destroyed a plan she had spent months building behind my back. You know that look people get when they're absolutely certain they've won? Keep that image in your mind. Because this story begins there. Before we get started, tell me where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more real stories about family betrayal resilience and the unexpected ways the truth finds its way to the surface. My name is Phoenix Price. I'm 67 years old, retired widowed, and according to my daughter Savannah, dangerously close to becoming incapable of operating a microwave without supervision. At least that's the impression she liked to give people. The funny thing is that I've spent most of my life investigating people who lied for a living. Not movie-style investigations. No car chases. No dramatic interrogations under a hanging light bulb. I spent 34 years as a claims fraud investigator for one of the largest insurance companies in Tennessee. My weapons were spreadsheets, timelines, phone records, receipts, and patience. Lots of patience. If you've ever met someone who enjoys reading the fine print on a warranty, imagine that person after 3 cups of coffee and 30 years of professional experience. That was me. These days, though, my life looked a lot less exciting. I lived alone in the same brick ranch house on Cedar Bluff Road in Knoxville that my wife Rose and I bought back in 1989. The house wasn't fancy. The kitchen cabinets were older than some college graduates. The hardwood floors creaked. The mailbox leaned slightly to the left because I kept forgetting to fix it. But it was home. Every corner carried a memory. The pencil marks measuring Savannah's height when she was a child still sat inside the hallway closet. Rose's favorite rocking chair still occupied the corner of the living room near the front window. I couldn't bring myself to move it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Rose passed away 4 years earlier after a long fight with ovarian cancer. Anyone who's gone through something like that knows life gets divided into 2 parts. Before and after. Before, there was always someone waiting in the next room. After, there was silence. A lot of silence. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I've never been particularly good at that. I kept busy. Every morning at exactly 7:15, I drove my aging silver Buick Lucerne to Pete's coffee shop on Kingston Pike. Pete himself had owned the place for nearly 20 years. The coffee wasn't remarkable. The chairs weren't comfortable. The air conditioning barely worked in July, but the regulars were family. There was Hank, who complained about gas prices every single day, regardless of what gas actually cost. There was Martha, who treated local weather forecasts like breaking national security intelligence. And there was my best friend, Walter Dawson. Everyone called him Walt. Walt was 69, retired, and impossible to embarrass. He had spent most of his life working as a paramedic. He had stories that could make an entire table laugh until coffee came out of somebody's nose. Most Fridays, he would walk into Pete's wearing some ridiculous t-shirt his grandson bought him online. One week it said, "I'm retired. Every day is Saturday." The next week, "I paused my game to be here." Walt considered these fashion statements. The rest of us considered them evidence. After coffee, I'd usually head home and spend a few hours in the backyard. I grew tomatoes. Nothing impressive, just enough to convince myself I was contributing to society. By noon, I'd be sweating through a faded University of Tennessee t-shirt while arguing with squirrels who believed my garden belonged to them. Most days were peaceful, predictable, comfortable. And honestly, after losing Rose, comfortable felt pretty good. The brightest part of my week was my granddaughter, Emma. Emma was 11 years old, smart, funny, curious about everything. Unlike most adults, she still asked questions because she genuinely wanted answers. Not because she was trying to win an argument. Every other Saturday she'd visit. We'd build model airplanes, watch old baseball games, eat pancakes covered in entirely too much syrup. One afternoon, she asked me why old people move so slowly. I told her it was because we had more memories to carry. She thought about that for a minute. Then she nodded seriously and said, "That makes sense." Kids can be surprisingly wise. Now, Savannah Emma's mother wasn't always the person she eventually became. I need you to understand something, because this story isn't about a cartoon villain. It's about a real person making increasingly bad choices. Savannah had grown up watching her mother fight cancer. She'd watched medical bills pile up. She'd seen fear, real fear, the kind that keeps people awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling. After Rose died, something changed inside Savannah. She became obsessed with security. Money became security. Success became security. Appearances became security. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lots of people react differently to loss. But gradually, our conversations started changing. Years ago, she would call and ask, "How are you doing, Dad?" Now she asked, "Have you updated your will?" Or, "How much is your homeowner's insurance these days?" Or, "Did property values go up in your neighborhood?" You notice little things when you've spent your entire career noticing little things. At first, I ignored it. Then I started keeping mental notes. Nothing formal, just observations. The way she seemed more interested in my paperwork than my blood pressure. The way she asked detailed questions about my retirement accounts, but couldn't remember the date of my last cardiology appointment. The way she always sounded rushed whenever I talked about my life, but suddenly had unlimited time when discussing finances. Still, she was my daughter. You give your children the benefit of the doubt longer than you probably should. That's just how parents work. A few months before everything fell apart, Savannah and her husband Blake came to visit for Sunday dinner. Blake worked in real estate development around Nashville. Confident guy. Expensive watches, expensive shoes, expensive opinions. The kind of man who talked about leveraging assets while eating free food. Halfway through dinner, Savannah casually asked if I had organized my estate documents recently. I remember the exact moment. I was holding a forkful of meatloaf. Blake was drinking sweet tea, and Savannah smiled the way people smile when they're pretending a question is harmless. I answered yes. Everything was organized, always had been. She exchanged a quick glance with Blake. A tiny glance. Less than a second. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. Years of fraud investigations teach you something important. The truth usually appears before people realize they're showing it. Then Savannah said something that seemed innocent at the time, something I didn't fully understand until much later. She leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, Dad, it might be a good idea to let someone help manage things if anything ever happened to you." At the time, I thought she was worried. Looking back, I realized she was taking inventory, and that conversation was only the beginning. The first time Savannah asked about my estate documents, I honestly believed she was concerned about my future. I had no idea she was already thinking about hers. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact period when Savannah stopped seeing me as her father and started seeing me as a future transaction. The change wasn't dramatic. That's the thing about most family problems. They rarely arrive kicking down the front door. They slip in quietly. One conversation at a time, one question at a time, one small compromise at a time. If someone had asked me, then whether my daughter loved me, I would have said yes without hesitation. I still believe she did. At least in her own complicated way. But love mixed with fear can become something ugly. And Savannah had been afraid for a long time. The first real warning sign appeared about 6 months before my heart attack. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I had just returned from a cardiology appointment. Nothing serious, just routine monitoring. At my age, doctors enjoy collecting appointments the way children collect baseball cards. I was putting groceries away when Savannah called. At first, the conversation seemed normal. She asked about my health, asked whether I was taking my medication, asked if I was exercising. Then she casually asked a question. "Dad, if something happened to you unexpectedly, who would handle everything?" I laughed. "Probably whoever gets stuck with the job." She didn't laugh. Instead, she said something that caught my attention. "I'm serious." That was the first time she brought up a power of attorney. Now, for those who may not know, a power of attorney can be a perfectly reasonable thing, responsible even. The problem wasn't the document itself. The problem was the timing and the persistence. Over the next few months, the subject kept returning, again and again and again. Almost every conversation somehow drifted back toward paperwork, estate planning, bank accounts, property ownership, investment statements, insurance policies. At first, she disguised it well. Then she stopped trying. One evening, she came over carrying takeout from a barbecue place on Kingston Pike. Savannah knew smoked brisket was my weakness. You could probably convince me to sign a peace treaty with North Korea if enough brisket was involved. We sat at the kitchen table eating dinner. For a while, everything felt normal. Then she pulled out a folder. A folder. At dinner. That should have been my first clue. Inside were several printed forms, power of attorney forms, medical authorization forms, financial management forms, the entire package. She pushed them across the table. I've already highlighted the important sections. You know that feeling when someone is moving too fast and expects you to keep up? That's exactly how it felt. I set my fork down, asked why the sudden urgency. Savannah sighed dramatically. Dad, you're getting older. There it was, the phrase, the universal warning label. You're getting older, as if I'd somehow missed that development. I told her I'd think about it. That answer clearly frustrated her. Not openly, but enough for me to notice. Years of investigative work taught me to watch reactions. People reveal more when they don't get the answer they expected. The next person to join the campaign was Blake. Now, Blake wasn't subtle. Subtlety and Blake had never met. About 2 weeks later, he called me out of nowhere. Blake never called me directly. Ever. So I knew immediately something was unusual. After a few minutes of small talk, he started discussing real estate values in Knoxville, specifically my neighborhood, specifically my house, specifically what my house might sell for. I nearly laughed. The man was using a shovel to do the work of a scalpel. He mentioned recent sales, property appreciation, market conditions, future opportunities. Then he asked if I had considered downsizing. I asked why. He paused. A little too long. Then he gave some vague answer about simplifying life. The conversation lasted maybe 15 minutes. But when I hung up, something didn't sit right. That night I opened a notebook. Nothing fancy, just a yellow legal pad. The same kind I'd used throughout my career. I wrote down the date, the time, the topics discussed. I wasn't building a case, not yet. I was simply recording observations. Old habits die hard. Over the following weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Savannah asked for copies of insurance policies, asked where I kept important documents, asked whether I used online banking, asked who had access to my passwords, asked where my safe deposit box was located. Notice what she wasn't asking. She wasn't asking if I felt lonely. She wasn't asking if I needed help around the house. She wasn't asking whether my medication was working. The questions always pointed in one direction: money, control, access. One Saturday afternoon, Emma accidentally revealed more than she realized. She was helping me build a model airplane in the garage. We were assembling the wings when she mentioned hearing her parents arguing. Children hear everything, even when adults think they don't. Emma said Blake was upset about a project, a condominium development outside Nashville. Apparently investors were getting nervous. Costs had increased, sales had slowed. Money was tight. Very tight. Then she said something that stayed with me. Mom says everything will be okay after Grandpa gets organized. I remember freezing with a tube of model glue in my hand. Emma didn't understand the significance. She was 11. To her, it was just something she overheard. To me, it sounded like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Suddenly, several conversations made more sense. The pressure, the paperwork, the urgency, the interest in my assets, the repeated discussions about future planning. I wasn't looking at concern anymore. I was looking at strategy. Still, I wanted to be fair. I need you to understand something, because this part matters. I wasn't searching for reasons to distrust my daughter. I was searching for reasons not to. Every parent does that. We explain things away. We make excuses. We tell ourselves they're stressed, they're tired, they're worried. They're going through a difficult period, and sometimes those explanations are true. Sometimes they're not. Around that same time, Walt noticed something too. The two of us were sitting outside Pete's coffee shop one morning drinking coffee from styrofoam cups. I mentioned Savannah's increasing interest in my finances. Walt listened quietly. Then he asked a simple question. When was the last time she visited without needing something? That question hit harder than I expected, because I couldn't answer it. Not immediately. I sat there trying to remember. Weeks, months, maybe longer. Visits had become transactions. Conversations had become negotiations. Even kindness sometimes felt scheduled. Walt didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Sometimes the most honest friend is the one who simply lets you reach your own conclusions. As summer moved closer, Savannah's impatience became more visible. Her requests became demands. Her suggestions became expectations. And for the first time in my life, I started wondering whether my daughter saw my future differently than I did. I wanted more years, more mornings at Pete's, more afternoons with Emma, more terrible t-shirts from Walt, more tomatoes, more baseball games, more life. Savannah seemed increasingly focused on what would happen after that life ended, and that difference would soon change everything. Because on a Tuesday night in early September, while sitting alone in my kitchen, I experienced something that made all those conversations suddenly feel far more dangerous than they had before. Then came the night that changed everything. The night my heart attack happened started out completely ordinary. That's one of the cruel things about life. The moments that change everything rarely announce themselves. Nobody knocks on your door and says, "Good evening, Phoenix. Just wanted to let you know this is the last normal day you'll have for a while." It was a Tuesday in early September. The weather in Knoxville had finally started cooling down after another brutal Tennessee summer. Not much, just enough that sitting outside after sunset no longer felt like breathing through a wet towel. I spent most of that afternoon doing absolutely nothing productive, and I was perfectly happy about it. I watched part of a baseball game, watered the tomatoes, argued with a squirrel that had once again declared war on my garden. The squirrel won, as usual. Around 6 o'clock, I heated up a bowl of chicken and rice soup. Nothing fancy. The kind that comes from a can and probably contains ingredients scientists haven't fully identified yet. I carried the bowl into the living room and settled into my recliner. For a while, everything felt normal, comfortable, quiet. The kind of evening Rose and I used to enjoy together. I still found myself glancing toward her chair sometimes. 4 years later. You never completely stop doing that. People tell you grief gets easier. Maybe it does. But some habits stay. At around 8:15 p.m., I decided to clean up the kitchen before heading to bed. I remember looking at the microwave clock. 8:16. I remember rinsing my soup bowl. I remember putting a glass into the dishwasher. And then I remember feeling something strange. At first it wasn't pain. Not exactly. It felt more like pressure, a heaviness, as if someone had placed a heavy toolbox directly in the center of my chest. I paused, took a breath, then another. The feeling didn't go away. Instead, it spread across my chest, into my shoulder, down my left arm. Now I've never been one of those men who rushes to the doctor every time they sneeze. In fact, my cardiologist once told me I had an unhealthy tendency to ignore symptoms. Apparently, surviving adulthood doesn't automatically make you wise. Who knew? So my first thought wasn't heart attack. My first thought was heartburn. Maybe the soup was fighting back. Then the pressure got worse, much worse. Within seconds, I was struggling to breathe. My knees felt weak. The room tilted slightly. A wave of cold sweat rolled across my forehead. That's when fear arrived. Real fear, the kind that cuts through denial instantly. I grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter. The pressure in my chest became crushing. Suddenly, every breath felt too small, too shallow, too late. I reached for my phone. There are moments when instinct takes over. Moments when your brain makes decisions before you've fully thought them through. And for whatever reason, the first person I called was Savannah. Maybe because she was my daughter. Maybe because parents never fully stop believing their children will come when they're needed. Maybe because that's what fathers do. The call rang and rang and rang. No answer. I ended the call. Tried again. Straight to voicemail. I called a third time. Still nothing. I remember staring at the screen. Her name? Her photo. The unanswered calls. And for the first time that night, I felt something worse than fear. Loneliness. Stay with me here, because that feeling is hard to explain. It's one thing to be alone. It's another thing to discover you're alone during the exact moment you need someone. The pain intensified. My hands started shaking. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. That's when whatever stubbornness remained inside me finally surrendered. I dialed 911. The operator answered almost immediately. I still remember her voice. Calm, professional, steady. The kind of voice you want to hear when your world is falling apart. She asked questions. I answered as best I could. Chest pain, difficulty breathing, left arm numbness, sweating, dizziness. Even I knew what those symptoms meant. She told me help was on the way. I tried to stay standing. I really did. But my body had other plans. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the kitchen floor, then lying on it. The tile felt cold against my back. The refrigerator hummed quietly nearby. The microwave clock glowed green in the darkness. 8:47 p.m. I remember staring at those numbers. For some reason, they became important, as if memorizing them would somehow keep me conscious. Seconds stretched. Every breath became work. Every movement felt impossible. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about wills. I wasn't thinking about property. I was thinking about one simple thing. I didn't want to die alone on a kitchen floor. Then I heard sirens. Distant at first, then closer, then right outside. I've never been happier to hear a siren in my life. The paramedics moved quickly. Questions, blood pressure, EKG leads, oxygen, equipment, controlled urgency. One of them looked at the monitor, then looked at me. That expression told me everything. Something was seriously wrong. They loaded me into the ambulance. The ceiling lights passed overhead as they rolled me through the driveway. For a strange moment, I found myself looking up at the night sky. Clear, dark, beautiful. It's amazing what details your brain chooses to remember. The ride to UT Medical Center felt both endless and instantaneous. Time works differently when you're scared. I remember hearing fragments of conversation, medical terms, numbers, instructions. I remember gripping the side rail of the stretcher. I remember thinking about Rose. Not in a dramatic way, just wondering whether she would have known exactly what to say if she'd been there. She always did. By the time we reached the hospital, everything became a blur of movement. Doctors, nurses, tests, questions, machines, bright lights. Eventually they stabilized me, not completely, but enough. Enough that the immediate danger passed. Enough that I could finally breathe without feeling like my chest was collapsing. Sometime after midnight, I woke up in a hospital room. My head felt heavy, my body felt exhausted, and sitting in a chair near the window was Walt. He looked terrible. His gray hair was sticking out in every direction. He was wearing sweatpants, old sneakers, and possibly the ugliest flannel shirt ever manufactured. The man looked like he'd been kidnapped from a retirement home and dropped into a Tractor Supply store. When he noticed I was awake, he smiled. "Well, Yeeti," he said, "this is one dramatic way to get out of bingo night." I laughed, which immediately made my chest hurt, which made Walt laugh even harder. And for the first time that night, I felt something besides fear. Relief. Not because I was safe. Not because the danger was over, but because somebody showed up. Somebody came. Somebody cared. I didn't know it then. I couldn't have known. But while I was fighting to stay alive inside that hospital, my daughter was smiling for a camera more than 500 miles away. And the proof was already sitting online for the entire world to see. I didn't sleep much that night. Partly because hospitals are designed by people who apparently believe human beings rest best while surrounded by beeping machines' fluorescent lights and strangers checking blood pressure every 2 hours. And partly because my mind wouldn't stop replaying those 3 unanswered phone calls. Now I want to be fair. There are plenty of innocent reasons someone might miss a call. Phones die. People take naps. They drive. They leave their phones in another room. Life happens. I knew that. I told myself that, over and over. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice kept asking the same question. If Savannah wasn't available, why hadn't she called back? By sunrise, I was awake and staring out the hospital window. A pale orange light was spreading across Knoxville. Traffic was beginning to move along Alcoa Highway. The city was waking up. My chest still hurt. Not the crushing pain from the night before. More like the soreness left behind after a violent storm. A reminder, a warning, a bill that hadn't fully been paid yet. Around 7:30, Walt returned carrying a cardboard tray with 2 coffees and a paper bag from a bakery. The man had spent 30 years as a paramedic and somehow still believed every medical emergency could be improved with pastries. Hospital food is a human rights violation, he announced. You just had a heart attack. Exactly. He handed me a blueberry muffin. Celebrate. I laughed, then regretted laughing because my ribs immediately reminded me they had opinions. Walt pulled his chair closer. For a few minutes, we talked about baseball, weather, anything except what had happened. Eventually, the conversation ran out of places to hide. Has Savannah called yet? He asked. I looked down at my phone. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no voicemail. No. Walt frowned, not dramatically, just enough. That answer seemed to bother him more than he wanted to admit. Then something happened that changed the entire direction of the story. Walt was scrolling through Facebook while finishing his coffee. Suddenly, he stopped. His eyebrows lifted. Then he looked at me, then back at the screen, then back at me. You know that expression people get when they're trying to decide whether they should tell you something? That's the look. Immediately I knew. What? Walt hesitated. I don't think you're going to like this. Then definitely show me. Another pause. Then he handed me the phone. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. A beach, palm trees, string lights, a bright orange sunset, a smiling couple holding champagne glasses. Then I recognized them. Savannah and Blake. The photo had been posted the previous night. The timestamp was visible. 8:52 p.m. 5 minutes after my first call. 5 minutes. Stay with me here, because numbers matter. Especially this number. 5 minutes after I was lying on my kitchen floor struggling to breathe. 5 minutes after I had reached for my daughter. 5 minutes after she ignored me. She was posing for vacation photos. The caption read, "Finally taking time to focus on what matters most, grateful for every moment." I stared at the screen, then at the timestamp, then back at the photo. For several seconds, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel betrayed. I didn't even feel surprised. I felt empty. That's the strange thing about certain kinds of disappointment. They arrive so quietly, you almost miss them. The real punch comes later. Walt sat silently. Smart man. He knew there wasn't anything useful to say. A few minutes later, he pointed at the screen again. Look at the location. I looked. Destin, Florida. Tagged publicly, not just Florida. Specifically, Destin. More than 500 miles from Knoxville. More than 500 miles from the hospital where her father had spent the night fighting through a heart attack. I handed the phone back. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Walt shook his head. That's rough. Yeah. Real rough. Yeah. Then he said something I'll never forget. Phoenix people tell you who they are. The hard part is believing them. I wish I could tell you I immediately accepted what I was seeing. I didn't. Part of me still searched for explanations. Maybe she had scheduled the post. Maybe she didn't know I was in the hospital yet. Maybe the door opened, and suddenly there she was. Savannah. Crying, rushing into the room, arms outstretched, face full of concern. If someone had walked in without context, they would have thought she'd spent the entire night by my bedside. Dad. She hugged me carefully, too carefully, like someone performing concern rather than feeling it. I was so worried. I looked at her, then at the phone sitting beside Walt, then back at her. I called. She froze for half a second, a tiny pause, almost invisible. Then she recovered. My phone was on silent. Of course it was. She sat beside the bed, held my hand, asked how I felt, asked what the doctors said, asked whether I needed anything. The performance was excellent, almost professional. But something had changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't listening to my daughter as a father. I was listening to her as an investigator. And those are very different things. Over the next hour, doctors and nurses moved in and out of the room. Savannah stayed close, sometimes too close, watching conversations carefully, paying attention to every detail. At first that seemed normal. Then she started saying things, small things, subtle things, the kind of comments most people wouldn't notice. Dad gets forgetful sometimes. That one was directed at a nurse. A little later, he's been having trouble keeping track of medications. That wasn't true. Then, I've been worried about him living alone. Another comment, another seed, then another, and another. By lunchtime, she had painted a picture, not of a man recovering from a heart attack, but of a man becoming incapable of managing his own life. I noticed the hospital social worker taking notes. I noticed Savannah speaking privately with staff. I noticed how often the conversation drifted toward future care decisions, future financial decisions, future living arrangements. You know that feeling when a puzzle suddenly reveals its image that was happening in real time. The vacation photo hurt. But this concerned me, because now I wasn't just looking at neglect. I was looking at a strategy. Then came the moment that finally erased any remaining doubt. Savannah stepped into the hallway to take a phone call. She left her purse on the chair. Her phone buzzed. The screen lit up. I wasn't trying to snoop. The screen was facing me. A message preview appeared. From Blake. Only one sentence. One sentence was enough. Keep pushing. We need this handled before the investors' meeting. I felt something inside me go cold. Not rage, not heartbreak. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Clarity. For months, I had been giving my daughter the benefit of the doubt. For months, I had explained away warning signs. For months, I had ignored instincts that had protected me throughout my entire career, that ended right there. Because suddenly, I understood something. The heart attack wasn't the opportunity. The heart attack was simply the event they intended to use. And Savannah's biggest mistake wasn't abandoning me that night. Her biggest mistake was assuming I was too weak to notice what she was doing. What she didn't know was that she'd just awakened 34 years of investigative instincts. And those instincts were already beginning to build a timeline. The strange thing about old instincts is that they never really disappear. They just go quiet. Like tools sitting in a garage waiting for someone to turn on the lights. For 34 years, I investigated fraud claims. Not because I enjoyed catching people. Honestly, most of the time I didn't. What fascinated me was the story hidden underneath the lie. Every dishonest person believes they're managing information. What they're actually doing is creating evidence. The more they lie, the more evidence they leave behind. That's why fraud investigations rarely begin with a confession. They begin with a timeline. And as I lay in that hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles, my brain began doing what it had always done. Building a timeline. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of habit. Stay with me here. Because this next part matters. People often imagine investigations as dramatic confrontations. They're not. They're paperwork. Screenshots, dates, receipts, tiny details nobody else notices. The truth usually hides in boring places. That afternoon after Savannah left to take care of some things, Walt returned carrying my laptop, an ancient Dell machine that probably qualified for historical landmark status. The thing took so long to start that you could make a sandwich while waiting. Still using this? Walt asked. It's loyal. It's prehistoric. It's loyal. We had this argument every time he saw the computer. While the laptop slowly wheezed itself awake, I began making a list. Hospital admission time, 911 call records, incoming and outgoing calls, text messages, social media posts, everything. Walt watched me scribbling notes. Then he smiled. Oh no. What? I know that face? What face? The face you get when somebody's about to regret something. I laughed, or at least attempted to. My chest reminded me that laughter was still under medical review. I'm not doing anything. That's exactly what worries me. Because Walt knew me, and he knew that when I became quiet, I was usually thinking. The first thing I did was save screenshots of Savannah's vacation post. The photo, the timestamp, the location tag, the comments, everything. Then I checked her public story archive. Still visible, still public, still active. And there it was. More evidence. Videos from the same evening. A beachside restaurant. Music, drinks, laughter. A short clip showing the sunset over Destin Harbor. The timestamp matched perfectly. 8:58 p.m., 9:03 p.m., 9:11 p.m. Piece by piece. Minute by minute. The timeline began forming itself. Savannah thought social media was helping her build an image. She never realized it was building a record. People tell on themselves constantly online. They just call it sharing. The next morning, I asked one of the nurses for copies of my admission records. Perfectly legal, perfectly routine. Nobody questioned it. Within 24 hours, I had official documentation showing exactly when I arrived at the hospital, exactly when treatment began, exactly when emergency services were dispatched. Again, not dramatic, just facts. Facts are patient. They don't need emotion to survive. Then came a moment that made me smile despite everything. Walt volunteered to print my screenshots. That was a mistake. Not because he wasn't trying to help, because technology and Walt had been enemies for decades. I gave him a flash drive. He drove to a FedEx office on Kingston Pike. 2 hours later, he returned looking unusually proud of himself. Got everything? Good. Then he opened a large cardboard tube. I stared. Inside was a poster. A giant poster, nearly 3 feet wide. The beach photo, Savannah holding champagne, printed in enormous high-definition detail. It looked like a movie advertisement. I blinked. Walt. What? I needed a document. You can read this one from across a parking lot. The man had accidentally selected engineering blueprint size. Even through the stress of everything happening, I laughed so hard tears appeared in my eyes. The nurse walked into the room, saw the giant beach photo, saw us laughing, then quietly backed out again, probably assuming she had interrupted some kind of senior citizen conspiracy. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. And honestly, I needed that, because beneath the humor was something painful. I wasn't investigating a stranger. I was investigating my daughter. That realization never stopped hurting, not once. The next step involved someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 8 months. Victoria Hayes. Victoria was one of the best estate attorneys in Knoxville. Sharp, calm, dangerously intelligent, the kind of lawyer who could dismantle an argument without raising her voice. We'd known each other for years. She had helped Rose and me organize our estate planning shortly after Rose's diagnosis. When she arrived at the hospital, she carried a leather folder and the expression of someone already suspicious. Phoenix. Victoria. You look terrible. Nice to see you too. Heart attacks aren't flattering. Fair point. After a few minutes of conversation, I explained everything. The unanswered calls, the vacation photos, the comments at the hospital, the pressure regarding power of attorney, the questions about assets, the message from Blake. Victoria listened quietly. She took notes, asked questions, requested dates, specific wording, specific events, specific timelines. Exactly the kind of questions I would have asked. When I finally finished, she closed her folder. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. Have you told Savannah about the trust? No. Victoria nodded. Good. Now I need you to understand something, because this was the secret Savannah never knew existed. 4 years earlier, after Rose died, I had updated everything. Not just a will. Not just beneficiary designations. Everything. Victoria had helped create a comprehensive trust structure designed to protect both me and my family. And buried inside that trust was a clause most people never expected. An elder coercion protection clause. In simple terms, if a beneficiary attempted to manipulate pressure, deceive, neglect, or improperly influence me for financial gain, they could lose significant control over trust assets. At the time, I never imagined the clause would matter. Victoria had recommended it. I agreed, then forgot about it. Until now. Does Savannah know it exists? Victoria asked. No. Does Blake? No. A slow smile appeared on her face. Not a happy smile. Not an angry smile. The smile of someone who just identified an important piece of information. Then don't tell them. I understood immediately. The strongest evidence isn't evidence people can prepare for. It's evidence they walk into willingly. Over the next hour, Victoria reviewed everything I'd collected. The screenshots, the timestamps, the messages, the hospital records, the notes I'd kept over previous months. When she finished, she leaned back. Phoenix, what? I think your daughter believes you're vulnerable. I sighed. Yeah. Victoria closed the folder. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. Good. That single word caught me off guard. She continued, because people who think they've already won tend to make mistakes. And as it turned out, Savannah Price Carter was about to make several. The biggest ones hadn't happened yet. The first thing I learned after leaving the hospital was that recovering from a heart attack is surprisingly boring. People imagine dramatic rehabilitation, inspirational music, life-changing revelations. What actually happens is a lot of medication, a lot of doctor appointments, and a lot of people reminding you not to lift things heavier than a gallon of milk. Apparently, surviving a cardiac event turns you into decorative furniture for a while. 3 days after my discharge, I was sitting in my living room wearing sweatpants and watching daytime television when Savannah arrived unannounced. Not unusual. What was unusual was the folder she carried, the second folder in less than a year. I was beginning to suspect office supplies were involved in a conspiracy against me. She sat on the couch, placed the folder on the coffee table, and smiled. Not her real smile. The other one, the smile people use when they're trying to sell you something. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone parked a pickup truck on my chest." She nodded sympathetically, then immediately reached for the folder. That told me everything. The concern lasted approximately 4 seconds. Inside were more documents, power of attorney forms, financial authorization forms, medical decision forms. Again. I looked at them, then looked at her, still worried about paperwork. "Dad, this isn't paperwork." "Looks like paperwork. It's protection." Protection? Interesting word. People rarely describe control as control. They describe it as protection, assistance, support, guidance. Those words sound better. I flipped through the pages slowly. Savannah leaned forward, waiting, watching, expecting. There was a time when that would have made me uncomfortable. Now it simply made me observant. "You don't need to decide today," she said, which usually means someone wants you to decide today. I nodded. "I'll think about it." For a brief second, disappointment flashed across her face, gone almost immediately. But there, you know that look. The look people get when reality refuses to follow the script they wrote. She recovered quickly. Then came another interesting moment. "I've also been thinking about the house." There it was. The house. Again. Not my health, not my recovery, not my emotional state. The house. The conversation moved exactly where I expected. Maintenance costs, property taxes, safety concerns, living alone, future planning. Every road somehow led back to selling my home. She wasn't subtle anymore. And the less subtle she became, the more confident she appeared. That worried me, because confidence usually means someone believes they already understand the situation. Savannah thought she understood everything. She didn't. After she left, I called Victoria. 20 minutes later, we were reviewing documents together over a video call. Victoria had already highlighted several concerns: language granting unusually broad financial authority, property management rights, access permissions, asset transfer capabilities. The documents weren't illegal, not at all, but they granted far more control than necessary, far more. Victoria removed her glasses. "She's moving faster." I noticed. That's rarely a good sign. No, it wasn't. The following week, things escalated. Blake started calling, frequently, much more frequently than any son-in-law should. The first call lasted 15 minutes. The second lasted 20. The third nearly half an hour. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Concern, advice, financial suggestions, real estate discussions, future planning. At one point, he actually referred to my house as an underutilized asset. I nearly choked on my coffee. I had lived there for 35 years, raised my daughter there, buried my wife from that house. Apparently, Blake saw it as a spreadsheet entry. One Thursday afternoon, he made a mistake. A small one, but important. We were discussing property taxes when he casually mentioned investor pressure. Then he stopped talking. Too late. The words were already out. I didn't react. Years of investigations had taught me something valuable. Silence is often more powerful than questions. People rush to fill silence, and Blake was no exception. Within 60 seconds, he had revealed far more than intended. Cash flow issues, construction delays, funding problems, investor concerns, nothing specific, but enough. Enough to confirm what Emma had accidentally hinted at months earlier. They needed money, badly. and suddenly my assets looked less like inheritance planning and more like emergency financing. A few days later, another mistake arrived. This one came by email. Victoria called me immediately after receiving it. I could hear amusement in her voice. And that was never a good sign for whoever happened to be on the opposite side of the situation. "You need to see this." "What happened?" "Your daughter tried to contact me." That wasn't unusual. "What did she say?" Victoria paused. Then she laughed. Actually, laughed. "She attempted to instruct me to revise your trust documents." I sat up straighter. "What?" "Oh, it gets better." The email claimed Savannah was communicating on my behalf. Apparently, I had suddenly decided to update Trust Management Authority. Apparently, I wanted significant changes made immediately. Apparently, I had somehow forgotten to mention any of this to my attorney. The email itself was ridiculous. But that wasn't the funny part. The funny part was the attachment. Savannah had accidentally attached the wrong PDF. Instead of supporting documentation, she attached a luxury spa receipt. Destin, Florida. Ocean Breeze Wellness Resort. Total charge $486.72. Massage package. Facial treatment. Private relaxation suite. I stared at the document, then started laughing. Hard. Maybe harder than I should have. My chest objected immediately. Worth it. Absolutely worth it. Victoria wasn't finished. Check the metadata. Now we were speaking my language. The email header revealed routing information, IP data, network information, location identifiers. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secret. Just technical details. The message had originated from the resort Wi-Fi network. Not Tennessee, not Knoxville, not anywhere near my hospital room. Florida. Exactly where her social media posts said she'd been, piece by piece. Evidence continued stacking itself. And the remarkable part, I wasn't collecting it. She was creating it. That's the thing greedy people often forget. Greed creates urgency. Urgency creates mistakes. Mistakes create evidence. Every single time. Meanwhile, Savannah became increasingly aggressive. The phone calls grew more frequent. The questions more direct. The pressure more obvious. One afternoon, she even suggested that stress from managing my finances might trigger another cardiac event. Think about that. The solution she offered for my heart attack was giving her control of my assets. That's a sales pitch that probably should have stayed inside her head. Still, I never argued, never accused, never confronted, not once. I simply listened, observed, recorded, and waited. Because Victoria was right. People who believe they've already won become careless. Savannah and Blake were becoming extremely careless. The final confirmation arrived the following weekend. Emma called me. Just to talk. No agenda, no hidden purpose. Just a granddaughter calling her grandfather. We talked about school, friends, science projects. Then she lowered her voice. "My parents fight a lot lately." My heart sank. "About what?" "Money." I closed my eyes. There it was, the truth. Not from emails, not from metadata, not from social media, from an 11-year-old child caught in the middle. That was the moment I stopped hoping I was wrong. Not because of what Emma said, because of how tired she sounded saying it. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my living room, looking out the window, thinking. Not about revenge, not about punishment, about consequences. Because there is a difference. A huge difference. I still loved my daughter. That never changed. But loving someone doesn't require allowing them to harm you. And for the first time since my heart attack, I realized where all of this was heading. Savannah thought she was racing against time. She thought my weakness was her opportunity. What she didn't realize was that every step forward was carrying her deeper into a trap she couldn't even see. And very soon, she was going to walk even farther than I imagined. About 10 days after I left the hospital, my cardiologist delivered news I wasn't thrilled to hear. Nothing catastrophic, nothing life-threatening. But he made it very clear that recovering alone wasn't the smartest plan. At least not immediately. So instead of returning full-time to my house on Cedar Bluff Road, I spent a couple of weeks staying with Walt. That arrangement amused both of us. Two retired men sharing a house sounds harmless, until you realize neither one remembers where he left his reading glasses. Every morning started with a scavenger hunt. Walt, have you seen my glasses? Are those them on your head? Oh. 5 minutes later, Phoenix, have you seen my phone? It's in your shirt pocket. Oh. We were not a high-performance operation. Still, those weeks helped. The routine was simple: medication, short walks, doctor appointments, coffee, television, more coffee. And every evening after dinner, Victoria and I reviewed everything we had collected. Not because we were preparing an attack, because we were preparing the truth. There's a difference. One evening, we sat around Walt's kitchen table, surrounded by folders, notes, and printed screenshots. The giant poster-sized beach photo was leaning against a wall nearby, like some kind of bizarre modern artwork. Walt refused to throw it away. It's evidence. It's 6 feet wide. Exactly. I gave up arguing. Victoria spread several documents across the table: hospital records, call logs, email copies, social media screenshots, notes, dates, times, connections. The timeline had become surprisingly clean, too clean. That worried me, because the clearer the evidence became, the harder it became to explain away. And despite everything, a part of me still wanted an explanation. Not for the vacation, not for the lies, for Savannah. I wanted to understand how we ended up here. One night, after Victoria left, Walt and I sat on his back porch drinking coffee. Yes, coffee at night. Our doctors would have objected. Good thing they weren't invited. The September air felt cool. Crickets chirped somewhere in the darkness. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Walt asked a question. Do you still think she'll tell the truth? I stared out into the yard. I don't know. You want her to? Yeah. Because I did. I really did. Stay with me here, because this part matters. People think revenge stories are about punishment. Most aren't. Most are about disappointment. The deepest wound wasn't that Savannah wanted control. The deepest wound was that I kept giving her opportunities to stop, and she never took them. A few days later, I called her, just to talk. Or at least that's what she thought. The real purpose was simple. I wanted to give her another chance. One more. Maybe the last one. She answered immediately. That alone told me something. Calls from me had become important. Very important. We talked about my recovery, my medications, cardiac rehab. Then I casually mentioned something. I've been reviewing everything that happened that night. Silence. Brief, but noticeable. Then she said, What do you mean? I kept my voice calm. The night of the heart attack. Another pause. Then she launched into a familiar story. Concern, panic, confusion. How terrible everything had been. How she wished she'd known sooner. How helpless she felt. I listened. Then I asked a very simple question. Where were you when I called? You could almost hear her brain shifting gears. At home. Not true. I mean specifically. Near Nashville. Also not true. I gave her another opening, another chance. You weren't traveling. No. I closed my eyes. There it was, the lie. Simple, direct, voluntary. Nobody forced it out of her. Nobody pressured her. Nobody cornered her. She offered it willingly. When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Not angry, just sad. Because every lie makes the next conversation harder. The following weekend, Savannah visited again. This time she brought lunch, turkey sandwiches, potato salad, cookies, and another agenda. You know that look, the one people get when they're trying to appear casual while carrying something important. Halfway through lunch, she mentioned financial planning. Again. Then estate administration. Again. Then future decision-making authority. Again. Finally, she said something that surprised even me. If something happened to you again, things could become very complicated. Complicated. Interesting word. She wasn't talking about my health. She was talking about my assets. And we both knew it. I decided to test something. Nothing dramatic, just a question. Have you ever thought about what your mother would say about all this? For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. Genuinely uncomfortable. The answer took longer than usual. No. That answer told me more than any argument could have. Because Rose had always valued honesty above everything else. Money came second, success came second, pride came second, truth came first. Always. The conversation ended shortly afterward. When Savannah left, I stood by Walt's front window and watched her drive away. Then Walt walked into the room carrying 2 bowls of chili. Now I need to tell you something important. Walt was many wonderful things: a loyal friend, a brave paramedic, a good grandfather, an excellent human being. He was not a cook. The chili he placed on the table looked dangerous. Steam rose from the bowl like it was attempting to escape. "What did you put in this, peppers?" "What kind?" "All of them." I took one bite. Immediately regretted every life decision that had led me to that moment. My eyes watered, my ears rang, my ancestors probably felt it. Walt started laughing so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. For the first time in weeks, I laughed too, really laughed. Not because the chili was good, because it absolutely wasn't, but because life hadn't completely become lawyers and betrayal and hospital records. For 10 minutes, we were just 2 old friends arguing about food. And honestly, I needed that. More than I realized. The next morning, Victoria called. Everything was ready, every document organized, every timeline verified, every screenshot preserved, every email archived. The final step was simple: a family meeting. Officially, the meeting would be described as an estate review, an opportunity to discuss future planning. Nothing threatening, nothing confrontational. Just paperwork. At least on the surface. Victoria scheduled it for Monday morning at 10 o'clock at her office on Gay Street in downtown Knoxville. Savannah agreed immediately. Too quickly. She thought the meeting would end with signatures. Authority, control, progress. Blake planned to attend too. That didn't surprise me, neither did his enthusiasm. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Not because I was nervous, because I was grieving. There's a difference. I wasn't worried about what Savannah might lose. I was thinking about what we had already lost. Trust. Maybe respect. Possibly more. The next morning, rain covered Knoxville. A gray, steady rain. The kind that makes streets shine under traffic lights. I stood by Walt's front door wearing a navy jacket and holding a folder. Everything was ready. The evidence, the timeline, the truth. Now all that remained was seeing whether Savannah would continue digging or finally stop. Unfortunately, by then, she had already climbed far too high to notice there was no roof above her. Monday morning arrived wrapped in cold rain and low gray clouds. Knoxville looked tired. The streets glistened. Wind pushed fallen leaves across the sidewalks along Gay Street. And as Walt drove us downtown, neither of us spoke very much. Not because there wasn't anything to say, because we'd already said it. The facts were organized. The evidence was ready. The timeline was complete. Whatever happened next would happen because of choices Savannah had already made, not because of anything I was about to do. Victoria Hayes' office occupied the second floor of a restored brick building overlooking downtown. Elegant, professional, quiet. The kind of place where people came to make decisions they couldn't take back. When Walt and I arrived, Victoria was already waiting. Several folders sat neatly arranged on the conference table. Legal pads, printed records, labeled evidence packets. Everything looked calm, orderly, almost ordinary, which somehow made the tension worse. Victoria greeted us, asked how I was feeling. I told her I'd survived Walt's chili and therefore feared nothing. That earned a rare smile. Then we waited. At exactly 9:57 a.m., the receptionist called. "They're here." Not she. They. Of course, Savannah never intended to attend alone. A moment later, the conference room door opened. Savannah entered first. Blake followed. Immediately, I noticed the difference in their body language. Savannah looked confident, prepared, almost relieved, like someone arriving to collect paperwork she'd already mentally claimed. Blake looked even more confident: expensive charcoal suit, polished shoes, perfect hair. The expression of a man who believed he was walking into a formality. Neither of them looked worried. That told me a lot. Savannah smiled warmly. "Dad." She leaned down and hugged me, quickly, carefully, then sat across from me. Blake took the chair beside her. Victoria remained at the head of the table. For a few minutes, everything stayed polite. Coffee was offered, small talk happened, weather, traffic, recovery, the usual nonsense people discuss when they're avoiding the real conversation. Eventually, Victoria opened a folder, and the meeting officially began. Thank you all for coming. Professional, calm, controlled. She glanced around the room. Phoenix asked me to conduct a comprehensive review of his estate planning structure following his recent medical emergency. Savannah nodded immediately. That's exactly what we've been hoping for. Of course it was. Victoria continued. Before discussing any future changes, I want to clarify several existing matters. Still calm, still polite, still giving everyone opportunities to tell the truth. Savannah seemed completely comfortable. That wouldn't last. Victoria started with easy questions. Medical status, recovery progress, living arrangements. Nothing threatening. Then she gradually moved toward caregiving, who had been helping, who had been involved, who had made decisions. Again, simple questions. The kind people answer automatically. Then she asked Savannah directly, "Can you describe your involvement during Mr. Price's cardiac emergency?" Savannah didn't hesitate, not even for a second. I dropped everything. There it was, the first brick. She continued, "I was focused entirely on my father's well-being." Victoria nodded, taking notes, encouraging her to continue. "I was constantly communicating with medical staff." Another brick. "I was preparing to assist with care decisions." Another brick. "I was available whenever needed." Another brick. You know that feeling when you're watching someone build something unstable? That's what it felt like. Each sentence sounded helpful, responsible, loving. But every sentence moved farther away from reality. Victoria asked another question. "Where were you on the evening of September 12th?" Savannah smiled politely. "At home." The room felt smaller, not because anyone reacted, because nobody did. Victoria simply nodded, then wrote something down. Savannah kept talking. "Once I learned what happened, I immediately began coordinating support. More notes, more confidence, more rope. At one point, she even described herself as my primary advocate. That one nearly made Walt choke on his coffee. He disguised it with a cough, barely. Blake decided to contribute. A mistake, a significant one. Dad's been struggling for a while. I looked at him. Really looked at him. He avoided eye contact. Interesting. Victoria turned toward him. Struggling in what way? Blake shrugged. Managing things. Can you be more specific? Another shrug. Just general aging issues. General aging issues, the legal equivalent of throwing fog into a room. Meaningless, vague, convenient. Victoria pressed gently. What incidents are you referring to? Blake opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Nothing, because there weren't any. He finally settled on, we've all noticed changes. No examples, no dates, no specifics, just implications. Exactly the kind of statement people make when they want a conclusion without evidence. Victoria simply wrote another note. Then she shifted topics. Financial management, future planning, trust administration, authority, control. The subjects Savannah clearly wanted. And once those topics appeared, her confidence returned. Fast, very fast. She explained why additional authority would help, why she could reduce stress, why she could simplify administration, why future decisions should be streamlined. Everything sounded reasonable, almost, until you looked closely. That's the thing about lies. The first layer often sounds believable. It's the details underneath that create problems. Then came reimbursement, the moment that genuinely surprised me. Victoria asked whether Savannah had incurred expenses while assisting with my care. Savannah immediately answered yes. Travel costs, time away from work, emergency planning, support coordination, multiple categories. The list grew longer every minute. My eyebrows nearly climbed off my face. Because according to Savannah, she had practically become a full-time caregiver. Meanwhile, reality involved a Florida beach resort. Victoria listened patiently, then asked, "Do you have documentation?" Savannah smiled. "I can provide it." That answer nearly ended me. Not because it was clever, because it was reckless. She still believed she could support the story. After everything, after all the evidence, after all the timestamps, she still thought confidence could replace facts. That level of certainty fascinated me. and saddened me. Mostly saddened me. Then Blake made his worst mistake of the morning. He became impatient, very impatient. You need to understand something. Greedy people often have one fatal weakness: waiting. They hate it, and Blake hated it. The conversation wasn't moving towards signatures quickly enough, so he pushed, hard. What's the point of delaying this? The room became very quiet. Victoria looked up. I'm sorry. Blake leaned forward. If everyone knows what needs to happen, why are we wasting time? There it was. The mask slipping, just a little, not enough for everyone, enough for me. Victoria folded her hands. What exactly needs to happen? Blake immediately realized the mistake. Too late. His answer came out slower this time. Planning. Weak, very weak. But the damage was done. Now everyone in the room understood something important. This wasn't about helping me. This was about reaching an outcome. A specific outcome. And Blake desperately wanted it. The meeting continued. Question after question, answer after answer. Every response creating a clearer record, a clearer timeline, a clearer contradiction. By the time we reached the 1 hour mark, Savannah had committed herself completely. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no corrections. She had repeated the story so many times she seemed to believe it. And that's dangerous. Because people who believe their own lies stop looking for exits. Eventually, Victoria closed one folder, then reached for another, a much thicker folder. The room grew quiet. Very quiet. Savannah noticed. So did Blake. For the first time all morning, neither of them looked confident, just curious. Victoria carefully removed several documents, then one photograph, a single photograph, printed in full color. She placed it face down on the table, then looked directly at Savannah. Before we continue, she said calmly, I'd like to review a few timeline details. And at that moment, something changed, not in the room, in Savannah, because somewhere deep inside her, instincts finally started whispering that maybe this meeting wasn't unfolding the way she expected. Then Victoria turned the first photograph over, and Savannah's smile finally learned what gravity felt like. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Victoria slowly turned the photograph towards Savannah. It was the beach picture, the one from Destin, the one with the champagne glass, the one posted at 8:52 p.m., the one she never should have uploaded. Savannah stared at it, then blinked. Once, twice, 3 times. The confidence that had carried her through the entire meeting disappeared so quickly it almost looked painful. What is this? She asked. It wasn't a real question. Everyone in the room knew exactly what it was. Victoria remained calm. You tell me. Savannah glanced toward Blake. A mistake. Because the moment she looked for help, everyone saw it. Everyone saw uncertainty replacing certainty. Blake shifted in his chair. Suddenly his expensive suit looked uncomfortable. Victoria opened another folder, then another, then another. One by one, documents appeared on the table. Not dramatically, not aggressively, methodically, like pieces of a puzzle being assembled. The first document was my phone record. 3 calls, 8:47 p.m., 8:48 p.m., 8:49 p.m. All unanswered. Victoria slid it across the table. Then she placed the hospital admission record beside it. Emergency intake, arrival time, medical assessment, treatment notes, time-stamped, verified, official. Then came screenshots, the vacation photo, the public story, the location tag, the restaurant check-in, the beach video. Every piece connected perfectly, every timestamp fit, every record supported the next. Stay with me here. Because this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not because I wanted Savannah embarrassed, because I wanted the truth to finally occupy the same room as the lie. Victoria pointed to the first image. At 8:52 p.m., this photograph was posted publicly from Destin, Florida. No response. She pointed to another document. At 8:47 p.m., Mr. Price called you while experiencing cardiac distress. Silence. Another document. At 9:03 p.m., your public story showed you at Harbor Walk Village. Another. At 9:11 p.m., a restaurant transaction appears associated with the same location. Another. At 10:26 p.m., an email attempting to communicate legal instructions originated from a resort network in Destin. Another. And the following morning, hospital staff were informed that you had been locally available during the emergency. The room felt frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even reached for coffee. For the first time all morning, Savannah looked exactly like what she was. Caught. Not because she had been outsmarted, because she had left footprints everywhere. She swallowed, hard, then finally spoke. I can explain. Of course. People always can. The explanation rarely improves things. Victoria nodded politely. Please do. Another long pause. Savannah's eyes moved across the documents, searching, calculating, looking for an escape route. There wasn't one. I was only gone for a short trip. Nobody responded. I didn't know Dad was in the hospital. Still, nobody responded. I saw the calls later. Victoria calmly pointed toward the timeline. Then, why tell hospital personnel you were immediately available? Silence. The dangerous kind. The kind with no answer inside it. Savannah looked at me. For the first time that morning, she wasn't looking at an elderly father. She was looking at the person holding the evidence. And what she saw scared her. Not anger, not rage. Disappointment. Deep disappointment. The kind you can't argue with, because it doesn't shout. I finally spoke. Slowly, quietly. Why didn't you just tell the truth? Nobody moved. I continued. You were on vacation. She stared at me. You missed the calls. Still staring. That would have hurt. My voice remained steady. But it would have been the truth. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then something unexpected happened. Savannah started crying. Real tears. Not the carefully controlled tears she'd displayed at the hospital. Real ones. Because for the first time she understood the problem wasn't the trip. It was everything that happened afterward. The lies, the manipulation, the story she kept building, the image she kept protecting. Unfortunately, Blake chose that exact moment to make everything worse. He stood up, fast, too fast. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. Victoria looked at him calmly. Is it? People make mistakes. Interesting choice of words. Mistakes. Not misunderstandings, not confusion. Mistakes. Blake immediately realized what he had said. Too late. Then frustration took over. And frustration is where greedy people usually destroy themselves. He pointed toward the documents. Do you know what kind of pressure we've been under? There it was, the real conversation. Finally, nobody interrupted. So he kept talking. Bad decision. The condo project is falling apart. Another sentence. The investors are demanding answers. Another. We've been trying to hold everything together. And another. Then he stopped. The room became completely silent. Because now everyone understood. The pressure, the urgency, the sudden interest in my assets, the power of attorney, the trust modifications, the house, the timing, the entire picture. Savannah closed her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what had happened. Blake had just revealed the motivation. Not intentionally, but completely. Victoria waited a moment, then opened one final folder. The largest folder on the table. The trust documents, the originals, the amendments, the protective clauses. Everything. She carefully removed several pages, then looked directly at Savannah. There is one final matter. The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Victoria continued. Several years ago, Phoenix established provisions designed to protect himself against financial coercion, manipulation, or neglect. Savannah frowned. What does that mean? Victoria turned the pages, then answered. It means that beneficiaries who attempt to improperly influence, pressure, or exploit him may lose administrative authority under the trust. I watched Savannah's face. Confusion, concern, fear. One emotion replacing another. What are you saying? Victoria folded her hands. Her voice never changed, not once. Based on the evidence reviewed today, Mr. Price has chosen to activate those protections. The sentence landed like a hammer. Savannah stared, blinking, trying to understand. Then the realization arrived. Slowly, painfully. You can't be serious, Victoria looked at her. I am completely serious. The room felt smaller, heavier, more final. The trust will continue supporting Emma's educational future. That part mattered. A lot. I wasn't punishing my granddaughter. Never. The medical care trust remains fully funded. Another important point. And future distributions remain available according to existing terms. Then came the part Savannah truly heard. However, you will not serve as trustee. Silence. You will not exercise management authority. More silence. You will not control asset decisions. The silence became absolute. Years of planning, months of manipulation, weeks of pressure. All gone. Not because I destroyed her, because she destroyed her own credibility. I looked directly at my daughter, the little girl who once rode a bicycle down Cedar Bluff Road, the teenager who cried when her mother got sick, the woman sitting across from me now. And I told her the truth, the simplest truth in the room. You left me alone. She lowered her eyes. I continued. Then you tried to convince people you were taking care of me. Tears rolled down her cheeks. And after that, I paused. The room waited. You tried to charge me for it. Nobody spoke. Not Victoria, not Walt, not Blake. Nobody. Because there was nothing left to add. The truth was sitting in the middle of the table, and for the first time since my heart attack, everyone could finally see it. You might think that was the end. It wasn't. Because families don't break cleanly like glass. They splinter. And some of those splinters stay with you long after the moment is over. When the meeting finally ended, nobody rushed toward the door. That surprised me. After everything that had happened, I expected anger, shouting, arguments, maybe even accusations. Instead, the room felt exhausted, like a storm that had spent all its energy. Savannah remained seated, her eyes fixed on the table. The evidence folders were still spread across the polished wood surface. The same documents that had taken months to create, months of choices, months of pressure, months of lies. Now they looked strangely small. That's the funny thing about bad decisions. They seem powerful while you're making them. Then one day they're just paper. Blake was the first person to stand. He looked angry, not at me, not even at Victoria, mostly at reality, the kind of anger people experience when consequences finally arrive. Without another word, he walked out. The conference room door closed behind him, and just like that, the confidence disappeared. I never saw him look back, not once. Savannah stayed where she was. Victoria quietly gathered documents. Walt stared out the rain-covered window. Nobody rushed her. Nobody pressured her. After several minutes, she finally spoke. "Dad," her voice cracked. Then she stopped. Whatever speech she had prepared no longer worked, because speeches require a version of events that supports them. The truth had removed that version. I waited. Eventually, she tried again. "I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you those words fixed everything." They didn't. Some apologies arrived too late, not because they're meaningless, because they're incomplete. And this one was incomplete. I nodded. Nothing more. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I honestly didn't know what to say. The daughter sitting across from me wasn't the little girl I remembered, and I wasn't the father she thought she could manipulate. We were both meeting different versions of each other. That takes time. A lot of time. A few minutes later, Savannah left. The room felt noticeably larger afterward. Victoria finished organizing paperwork, then she looked at me. "You okay?" That question made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely didn't know the answer. Was I okay physically? Mostly. Emotionally? Not even close. But I was free. And that mattered. The following months moved slowly. Recovery usually does. Cardiac rehabilitation became part of my routine. 3 mornings a week. Exercise, monitoring, walking, stretching. The kind of activities that remind you aging is a full-time occupation. I followed doctor's orders, mostly. Walt made sure of that. He treated my medication schedule like a military operation. One afternoon, he actually called me because I was 12 minutes late taking a prescription. 12 minutes. The man had become a pharmaceutical air traffic controller. But if I'm being honest, I needed him. We all need somebody. That's another lesson age teaches you. Independence sounds wonderful until life reminds you that human beings weren't designed to carry everything alone. Meanwhile, Savannah's life became complicated. I didn't celebrate that. Despite what happened, she was still my daughter, and seeing her struggle wasn't satisfying. It was sad. The condo project Blake had been desperately trying to save continued falling apart. Investors withdrew. Funding collapsed. Several planned phases were canceled. Within months, local business publications were reporting significant financial losses. Then came rumors about problems inside their marriage. Those rumors eventually turned into reality. I never asked for details, didn't want them, but Emma mentioned that her parents were arguing constantly, more than before, much more. That hurt, because children always pay part of the bill for adult mistakes, even when they did nothing wrong, which is why one thing never changed: Emma. The educational trust remained intact, exactly as Victoria and I had planned. Every dollar, every protection, every opportunity. I refused to let an 11-year-old girl become collateral damage. She still visited, still built model airplanes with me, still asked impossible questions. One afternoon, she asked whether adults ever fully figure life out. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. No, never. Nope. Then why do adults act like they know everything? Now, that's a question worth asking. Months passed. Winter arrived, then spring. Life slowly settled into a new shape. Not better, not worse, just different. I eventually sold my old Buick, not because I wanted to, because it had reached the stage of life where mechanics looked at it with sympathy. I replaced it with a used Subaru Forester. Reliable, practical, boring, which is exactly what I wanted. My heart had already provided enough excitement. Walt hated the Subaru. He claimed it lacked personality. This criticism came from a man whose favorite chair had duct tape on it. I ignored him. Most importantly, I moved back home. My house, my garden, my memories, my life. Walt still had a key. That wasn't negotiable. Every Friday evening he showed up uninvited, usually carrying food, usually complaining about something, usually wearing an embarrassing t-shirt. Some traditions deserve protection. Then one evening, nearly 6 months after the meeting, my phone buzzed. A text message. Savannah. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. The message wasn't dramatic, no long explanation, no excuses, no requests, just one sentence. I was scared, greedy, and wrong. I don't know how to fix this. I read it 3 times, then a 4th, because for the first time in a very long while it sounded honest. Not perfect, not complete, honest. There's a difference. I didn't answer immediately. I waited until the next day. Then I sent a short reply. Neither do I. A few minutes later, she responded. What happens now? I looked at the message for a while, then typed coffee. That was it. No discussion about money, no paperwork, no trusts, no assets, just coffee. Several weeks later, we met at Pete's coffee shop. The same place where I'd spent countless mornings after Rose died. The same place where Walt and I had solved absolutely none of the world's problems. Savannah arrived early, I arrived second. Neither of us knew exactly what to say. So we started small. Weather, traffic, Emma's school, normal things. There were awkward silences, painful moments, unanswered questions, old wounds, nothing magically healed. This isn't that kind of story. But for the first time in years, we were talking without an agenda. That mattered, maybe more than anything else. Today, my heart carries a scar. The doctors say it always will. They're probably right. My family carries one too. And honestly, that scar may take even longer to heal. But healing isn't the same thing as pretending. For years, we pretended everything was fine, pretended conversations were normal, pretended motivations were pure, pretended trust still existed. Now at least we're dealing with reality. And reality, painful as it can be, is where healing begins. My name is Phoenix Price. I survived a heart attack. I survived betrayal. And somehow I managed to keep the part of myself that still believes people can change. Not because everyone does. Because sometimes they do. And sometimes that's enough. Life lesson. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. Love and trust are not the same thing. You can love someone deeply and still set boundaries. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. And you can care about family without surrendering your judgment. Too many people confuse kindness with weakness. They think protecting yourself means you've stopped loving the people around you. It doesn't. Real love requires honesty. Real trust requires accountability. And real family isn't measured by words, social media posts, or appearances during good times. It's measured by who shows up when life gets difficult. Pay attention to actions. Pay attention to patterns. And most importantly, don't ignore what your instincts are trying to tell you. Sometimes the truth arrives quietly long before the evidence does. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.